I'll turning first then to the first questions. Well, getting actually ready on the day for producing the recording. What are we talking about there?
Well, I guess top tips of actually taking the recording, I'd say, is get there early. It's better to be there an hour early than it is to be there 30 seconds late, because you can't wind back time. You want to anticipate every possible hazard you can. I think in terms of the quality of a video recording, the number one thing that I'm continually telling people is to make sure you're using a tripod. The single most common flaw in recordings, or things that make them look really poor, is the fact that they're handheld. People think they can handhold a camera steadily, and they can't, regardless of the size of the camera, because it's not the weight of the camera, it's the amount of time you have to hold it. And you can hold something like this pen, and after about a minute, it's going to start to wander. Tripod's tremendously important. Obviously, we've talked about getting good sound and worrying about things like lighting. I think those all come down to just being well prepared, trying to anticipate everything.
Okay. Anything you'd add on that, Terry?
Only a pedagogic preparation. Make sure that your lecture has some interesting high points. Obviously you don't want a monotonous lecture to go out on video, so really prepare some additional aids if possible, so that when it is turned into a video it makes it more interesting to review, and they will also help people index key points in the lecture.
I suppose we have two strands to activity going on. Sometimes we have the sole lecturer wishing to capture what they're doing on a daily basis as either as a one-off or as a champion of the technology. And in other institutions we may actually have a programme of recording. When it comes down to, I'm thinking of that champion who's maybe a little bit of ahead of the institution's policy. They might be faced with the situation that they have a lecture at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they've got their small camera, they've got the tripod, there's another lecturer in before them. Are we talking about this as not looking particularly feasible as something to do?
It doesn't sound like a good idea.
It's not great, but you have to play the hand that you are dealt, put it that way. And I think, provided in a situation like you speak of, if you know that if you have gone to the lecture theatre ahead of time, maybe the day before, maybe 2 days before, you know what's involved and what you need to do. Then you are still prepared in a sense, so the previous lecture gets out and you've got a 5-minute turnaround. If you know what to do, you know what to do in those 5 minutes. So it may not be ideal, but ideal is a rarely encountered phenomenon.
Indeed. And it may be a situation where coming back to audio recording might be a better idea to ensure the quality.
It may, very well.
There's the questions, of course, about the rights clearance, and again about having the students involved. And if you have a lecture with a discussion from the students, whether they get rights by virtue on the day of being involved in the class. Again, this is one that often comes up in terms of both copyright issues, in terms of their contributions to a class. Maybe not happen so much in a lecture, but more so in a seminar and more discursive type learning situation. And also the questions of data protection, that someone is recognised, recognisable indeed, as being part of a class, a particular course at a particular institution, and whether that has to be dealt with, especially in the situation where sensitive things are being spoken about, which may happen, of course, as well in this. So there's a question of how do we sort that out on the day when we have got a lecture theatre full of students, or even a seminar with a small number of students. And well, one of the things in it is more about the preparation and ensuring when you get to that point, first of all, the students are aware that that this is the situation, that they're going to be recorded, and it could be in time to come as part of the prospectus at the particular university or the course brochure at a college. There is a statement saying that this college or university believes in making materials available in different ways, and therefore routinely records learning materials such as tutorials, classes in general, lectures and so on, and the student will agree by coming on this course that they will be part of that.
Isn't it also the case that, certainly in the case of a lecture as opposed to a tutorial where there's not a significant amount of input from the students, because the students are effectively going about their normal day-to-day business, that you are perfectly entitled to take limited shots of them.
Okay. Well, coming to that's the more the data protection side of it. And again, first of all, the question is, are they identifiable along with significant personal information? Now, the fact of being a student that could be identifiable from their image and being linked with a course at an institution could be enough for that. We don't have a great deal of information, again, case law, about what amounts to the significant biographical information. But you can imagine that, for example, someone who's protected by some sort of exclusion order or non-contact order, and who's at an institution and does not want to be recognised as being there, then to appear on a video that gets put out as an open educational resource, for example, as being in 2011 at the University of Strathclyde, would not be sensible. That's an exceptional case, and again, you have to be able to deal with those exceptional cases. But that can be done by giving the student knowledge of what's going to happen beforehand, and also giving them an option to opt out. So they are making a real choice, and that real choice is consent. That consent doesn't need to be a 30-page form that they sign, and indeed it shouldn't be a 30-page form that they sign, because one could argue that isn't really consent. A frequent discussion is, can't we just get students to sign something when they come in the door at registration? They say, I hereby give away all my rights and I hereby consent to anything that we might do in terms of data protection. And the answer is, that's probably not sufficient consent under the Data Protection Act. It's not a realistic opportunity to back out, and again, that's what we're looking for in these situations. It could be, if you don't want to tackle these issues, that you design the recording and the setup such that you avoid it. For example, by having questions at the end of a lecture, or at least an opportunity for questions at the end that are not going to be recorded. So if a student wishes to say, actually, in my experience, something is different to what you've just said, and they might not want to say that, actually, I used to do something, or I used to work in an abortion clinic, and actually what you've said about it doesn't meet with my experience. That's not something they might want in there. So it's about setting up the opportunity, perhaps.
But what about what about the age of the students? Is that ever significant?
Very rarely. The Data Protection Act, the way it works is there's no strict age limits. You can give consent as soon as you're able to understand the consequences of that. The Information Commissioner has said that's from a pretty young age. Post high school, you're sort of definitely there. From the age of somewhere around about 14, there normally wouldn't be an issue, unless the institution has some particular reason to think, well, why might this person not understand this consent? In which case, they would go to the guardian, the legal guardian, in order, or which could be the parent, in order to seek consent. But I only in the exceptional cases. So if you're talking about a student down to 14 and in the usual situations, then you can go ahead and take their consent.
From a content point of view, if somebody is recording a lecture on the day, they really don't have much opportunity to make any significant changes, and you would want them to stay with the material that was planned, because afterwards, when a transcript of that lecture is made available, it's going to be far easier if it wasn't performed ad hoc. Yeah. So this would help people meet their accessibility and inclusion needs, because they'd be making that transcript available alongside the content. However, it's not only the institution that's making the recording, the individual has an opportunity to make a recording as well. We've already mentioned that students now have access to their own personal devices that can take their own audio recordings, and devices like the Pulse Pen, which allows students to take written notes, and then when they tap on the appropriate words in those written notes, the audio that was recorded at that time can be played back to them. There are applications like Microsoft OneNote that somebody may have on their own laptop. They may be using that to record the audio at the same time, so the lecturer should know that that audio is being recorded, although we didn't say it was legally necessary for that to happen. But if the student has access to a range of their own devices and they share their experiences in how these devices can benefit each other, then that would really help the lecture be promoted.
Okay. Thank you very much. On those lines, is there anything that the lecturer, the presenter, can do on the day when the presentation is being made to assist in its accessibility in terms of navigability, as you said earlier on? As the lecture goes on, is there anything that can be done?
No, I think as long as they just give clear milestones during the lecture, so then the students making the recording can easily step back to the appropriate component. In keeping within the time limit and not cramming a lot of information in towards the end clearly needs to be avoided as well. You don't want the content of the lecture crashing as it comes to a close. But on the day, as long as the information is clear, then it should be easily accessed by students with different needs.
On the issue of navigability, that's actually an interesting area where lecture capture systems can prove quite useful, because a lot of these systems, when you import the slides during the course of the lecture, it will automatically make chapter marks in the recording of the lecture.
Yeah, and there are tools. Is it Audio Note Taker allows students to submit bulk content as an audio recording, for it to be returned as a number of separate MP3s based on space gaps which have been defined by the students. You know, every time there's a pause of 5 seconds, give me that back as a separate MP3 file, which makes it easier for them to access and use separately. And obviously, if it's in smaller chunks, then it can be used on a mobile device more easily.
Thank you. Is there anything that we can say that would help preparing the lecturer when we're talking about a situation whereby it's not the lecturer themselves doing the recording, someone else, or even where it is the lecturer self-recording? What sort of things should they think about in terms of the physical layouts and their mannerisms, perhaps? Is there anything there that they should be considering?
I think a lot of the concerns there are assuming that there is a separate person operating the camera aren't really going to be concerns of the lecturer. They're going to be concerns of the camera operator. I mean, things like if a lecturer is someone who tends to talk with their hands a lot, stuff like that, you're going to want to shoot perhaps a wider shot of them, because their gestures are part of their performance, part of the way they lecture. We talked in the little video, it referred obviously to the situation of lecturers who wander about the lecture hall. I mean, in a situation where your only recourse to recording sound is a microphone on the podium, obviously you'd have to indicate to your lecturer that you don't want them to move around, or in the case of a lecturer who insisted they had to, warn the lecturer that they're perfectly allowed to move around, but half of what they say isn't going to get recorded. Mm-hmm.
Also, with respect to the content, most lecturers will be using PowerPoint. There's a staff packs available on the JISC Techdis site which will assist people in making best use of PowerPoint.
Okay, but the question of packing up afterwards then, the recording is done. Hopefully they haven't done what I once did and set up a camera and microphone and gave a lecture and forgot to plug in the microphone, so when I found out afterwards I had no audio.
Well, people either do that or they plug the microphone and then they forget to turn the camera on.
I forget to turn the camera on. Yeah. Packing up, it's a case of making sure you take everything with you, I take it.
Absolutely. There is a phrase they use at the BBC called doing a nervous. And doing a nervous means that after you've packed up everything and put it all in the case and zipped it up, then you go all around again a second time as if you had never packed up. And it's amazing the number of times you'll find something that you were sure you would have put away and it's still there. I always think that the best attitude to take is you want to leave the place looking better than it was when you arrived, so that you are welcome the next time you go along to that lecture hall.
And I suppose as a practical thing, labelling and protecting the, if you can, the
Absolutely.
Medium on which you've recorded.
Most recording media will have some sort of write protect. Tapes or SD cards have little tabs that you can flick down. Even old VHS tapes, everybody remembers they had a little plastic tab you could break out. If you do not want to record over your material, it's a good idea to use those. It's also a good idea to write as much metadata down, and just quickly for the purpose of viewers who may not have heard that term before, I hope everyone has, but metadata is basically information about the recording, the date, the time, the place, the lecturer, the subject perhaps, maybe some tags, things like that, how it was recorded. Get all that information down at the point of making the recording, because if you don't, when you finally remember to record the metadata, it's very likely you will have forgotten some of it.
Now, there may also be opportunities to release the content in different parts at different times. It may be convenient to release the audio as a single file internally to the group of students before making the full video lecture available. Yeah? So it may be a quick solution to actually, in effect, pre-release the audio track. There may be opportunities there for a specific subset of a group of students from that lecture.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of the section that we have just done there, making the lecture. And we're going to take a short 2-minute break, and we're going to then go on to the question of what happens afterwards. Having made the recording, then you do want to do something with it afterwards, and that's the question we're left with. In the meantime, if you've got further questions, then please do get the questions in by the form on the page or through Twitter. So in 2 minutes' time, we'll see you back here.